Good news you can use when you have a phone, yeah. She got the good news you can use. Good news you can use for your life.
Hello, and welcome to this edition of A Conversation About Racism. This is where we get together once a month to talk about the social injustices that are going on in this country. Well, Nikole Hannah-Jones just won't seem to go away. We don't want her to go away, but the story behind her just won't seem to go away. And it's sad because the story is now being twisted in such a negative light. And we are going to talk about the 1619 Project and the fallout as a result of what has happened with Nikole Hannah-Jones deciding not to take the tenured position at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, instead moving on to Howard University, which is one of the, if not the most acclaimed HBCU, historically Black college and university in the country. And joining me today is an esteemed panel who will be sharing their thoughts, and this will probably be a very lively discussion. So get your favorite beverage, sit back and enjoy. So let's just start with Dr. McDonald. Would you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Trevi A. McDonald. I am the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Journalism School at UNC Chapel Hill, as well as the Julian Scheer Term Associate Professor and the only Black woman to be a faculty member at UNC with tenure.
Brooks?
Aloha, my name is Brooks Bays. I'm a scientific and technical illustrator at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I've lived in Hawaii for 40 years, but my family is originally from Texas, going back 4 or 5 generations.
Pam?
Hi, I'm Pam Purifoy. I am a public relations and marketing professional for the past 30 years. I am a native of Detroit, but have been living in Durham, North Carolina for 30 years now.
And last but not least, Peter. Oh, I'm sorry, Pam. Go ahead, finish. Please.
I'm fine.
No, please finish.
And I'm always interested in issues of pop culture, race relations, and that type of thing. So I'm pleased to be on the panel with you today, Bev.
Awesome. And last but not least, Peter.
Thank you, Bev. Yeah, I was Peter Corbett. I'm a mostly retired journalist in Arizona. I've been here working for 35 years and grew up in Ohio. And during my journalism career here, I worked mostly at the Arizona Republic the last 15, 20 years and worked with a University of North Carolina alumni, Eugene Scott. Well, I worked in the newsroom with Eugene, and he's gone on to great things as a national commentator, and good for him. So anyway, it's been a while since I've been on one of your panels, Bev, but looking forward to the discussion and learning a lot today.
Awesome. Well, we're going to kick it off with you, Peter, and ask you what you know about the 1619 Project.
Okay. As I mentioned before, when we were just warming up here, I heard Nikole Hannah-Jones on Fresh Air talking about the 1619 Project, I guess it was 2 years ago. And it was good to hear her voice telling the stories and how they worked on the project. And also, she made a very strong argument for reparations. And of course, after listening to it as I was traveling, I kind of dialed in, went on my New York Times site and read some of the project, and then also have just refreshed some of it just in the last few days. So I know what a lot of the discussion has been about it and the controversy at North Carolina. So that's where I am on this.
Brooks, what do you know about the project?
My story sounds really similar to Peter's. I subscribed to the Times and I saw it when it came out and read the first couple of essays in it, and then over the course of the last couple of years have read several more and have been following with disgust and a complete lack of surprise. The controversy about it, as white people can't stand the truth, and that's pretty much it.
So let me ask you, why don't you think they can stand the truth? What is the issue about that?
I would say one of the things is that they don't want to feel, they don't feel as empathetic. They don't feel like they should be blamed. It's not their issue. It's not their problem that their forefathers, did this. And so that they just, there's a certain avoidance of guilt, I guess. I don't know. It's hard to imagine.
I think it's it's maybe giving them too much credit to say they know, but they feel, they can see that their generational wealth is based on generational theft. And the position that they have is attained and maintained by the systematic, brutal oppression of other human beings. And there are a lot of people who are still really kind of sad that they can't own other people. You know, capitalism has always wanted slavery, and capitalism works to enslave workers and comes as close to slavery as it possibly can. And they know it.
Okay. All right. So
Basically.
piggybacking off of that, Pam, let me ask you this. Is it necessary to have critical race theory taught in the school system? I mean, is it absolutely necessary, or can we get around with just a little drops here and there? Do we really need it?
You know what, Bev, my understanding of critical race theory as it is, it was came about with the scholar Derek Bell at Harvard University, and it's the intersection of race and law. So for some reason, it's like that term has been bantered about. What I'd like to say, rather, the issue is can we just teach the plain old truth about how our country was founded with slavery and the imprisonment of other people, period. And let's not use the terminology critical race theory, which really, I don't think it doesn't really belong in this whole context. It's just a whole a PR playbook in the Republican Party to use that terminology because it sounds great. It's a good buzzword, and using it out of its context of what it was intended. And they have used it to beat up, to drum up their base, to get them all in a frenzy about teaching what they're really supposed to be teaching is American history, which slavery and racism and oppression and all of those things are a part of. And there's a way to teach that. If we can teach kids about all the good things and whatnot, we need to teach them the truth, period.
Peter, did you want to say something there?
I was going to just commenting on what Pam said about buzzwords, and this just goes along the lines with defund the police. It's such a short little thing to use as a cudgel against, something that is, we all want to reform the police. We all want to be teaching the truth about American history. And this is just a way to just kind of tear that down and make it some kind of evil thing. And we're getting into this thing, we're legislating how to teach. We're also legislating how to teach sex education and contraception. Why does anybody want to go into teaching if they're going to be so constrained about teaching the truth?
Yeah.
Well, and if I might jump in, because I'm a bossy white guy, it's that word theory. And they have an industry. I mean, I work for climate scientists, and my background was evolutionary zoology. And I've heard for 40 and 50 years, how they lie about and are terrified about science. And so when they call it critical race theory, it's like climate change and evolutionary theory, and it's this communist, un-American scienciness that is trying to make us feel bad about our history. And they fundamentally distrust science or anything that is linked to scientific investigation.
So let me bring you in, Dr. McDonald, and ask you, what has been the fallout from the whole 1619 project and, not bringing in Nikole Hannah-Jones when she was really someone the students were looking forward to having on the staff?
Yeah, so I'm a straight shooter. I'm from the South Side of Chicago, and there's a particular narrative that has really just been embedded into national memory that the 1619 Project challenges. Our education and how we learned history has not been inclusive. I teach a course each spring titled The Black Press in U.S. History. And one semester I was teaching about the Wilmington Massacre of 1898. Most of my students went to high school in North Carolina and never heard of this. It's the only successful coup d'etat in U.S. history. They never learned of it until they took an elective their junior or senior year in college. And one of my students, I remember a white male student, said he thought it was really a shame that the only two people he learned by name in his only two Black people he learned by name in his social studies class were Crispus Attucks and Dr. King. So this project, and it's been adopted by, I was watching a video earlier today with Nikole Hannah-Jones and Skip Gates that was recorded like in December of 2019. So a few months after the project was released, 2,000 school systems in the country were using that curriculum from the 1619 project that the Pulitzer Center created and made available to schools.
Why
So
do you
that's,
think the powers that be at UNC just kind of like wanted to back away from it? I mean, because it is about, you're teaching students how to be objective as journalists. So why would they be so afraid to deal with that?
So it's really multi-layered. The position that Nikole was recruited for, and she was recruited for this position and the dean had been recruiting her for a while. It was a Knight chair in race and investigative journalism. And that appointment has always come as a full professor with tenure. So there's that power dynamic of having someone at the end at that level as a full professor with tenure. She was going to be teaching investigative journalism and magazine writing. So she wasn't even teaching, history, but we know from media coverage that one of our donor who pledged money for the journalism school to be named after him sort of stepped in, and I'm just stating the facts, expressed concern to the chancellor, to the provost, to the vice chancellor of development, as well as to a member of the board of trustees. And those are the individuals we know about, because he had an issue with her with the 1619 project, which I'm pretty sure he has not read in its entirety, as well as he has a certain view of objectivity in journalism that does not really speak to the work that is very, very dated. And it doesn't speak to the work that journalists from different perspectives and who have different experiences in terms of how they cover the press or cover stories. And he had an issue with that. Just a little bit of the timeline. We found out about a year ago that the dean was recruiting Nikole. She did a tenure package. That package was reviewed externally very rigorously before it went to the schools committee. They reviewed it, then the full professors voted, and then it went up to the university level. And at that point, the provost usually puts the package forward to the board of trustees for a vote. And it was to go forward in November, and there was no vote. And then again in January, there was no vote. And it was caught up in politics.
Someone said to me not long ago that they thought that, what happened, the debacle with Nicole Hannah-Jones and some other things is just a part of a bigger plan by the powers that be. And I'm going to just say the GOP party, because that appears to be who is in power in a number of states in the country. This is a bigger plan because you're starting to see voting rights turned back. You're starting to see restrictions here and there and everywhere. So what's your take on it, Brooke? Why do you think that some people are making an effort to revert us back to a time period where there were a lot of restrictions on people of color?
First, I was going to say, Dr. McDonald said exactly what I would have guessed. Because when my first guess was some white guy who writes checks said no. Was I correct in my guess that he's white?
You were spot on.
There was no question. There was like, rich old white man said no. Why are they in a panic? And that's what they are. They're in an absolute panic in demographics. They look at the curves of the population curves of the United States of America, and they see what different lines of different ethnicities are doing. And they see that America is browning and America is getting younger. And there is nothing on Thor's Green Midgard that terrifies old white people as much as young brown and black people. And so the thought of young and brown and black people having power scares them because they can't imagine, we've discussed this before, they can't imagine that justice does not mean revenge. And so they're doing everything they can to create a South African minority rule apartheid system. If they could get away with it, tomorrow morning we'd wake up under his eye.
So Peter and Brooks, you both fall under that demographic of the white male privilege. So
Older white men too, if I may be so bold.
well, older white, you're older too, older white men privilege. So it would be in your, I heard that. It would be in your best interest to jump on the bandwagon and say, I'm just going to ride this crest because I like things the way they are.
I don't. That's not me. I just. I realized that I guess it's come to me in the last 20 years or so that yes, I have the white male privilege because it became kind of a talking point. But I want equality. I want to share in the wealth of this country, and that just one of the reasons why the GOP is setting up so many hurdles is because they don't want to give up that power. And I don't see it the way they do. I just want fairness and truth for America, and so I'm not threatened by it. I'm not threatened by women taking more power in this country. I think we'd be better off if we had more women in leadership and CEOs of companies. So more diversity, more is good for America, and I'm all on board with that.
But would you have said this 20 years ago? I mean, looking at the state of where we are now in this country, can you be honest and say, well, yeah, that's just probably the way I really did think 20 years ago, or no, I really didn't think much about it 20 years ago. Did you even understand that you had white privilege?
I guess I don't know that I was aware of it as I am now, because it wasn't something that was that talked about that much. And there's been a huge shift in my professional working career. Is mostly all white newsrooms, more men than women, and it has changed. And even though Gannett at the Arizona Republic has bragged about how they've diversified their newsroom, some studies that the union did have shown that they haven't done a very good job of it. And the people who are making the most highest salaries are white males, and the new younger journalists of color are not making the same wages. So it's something that has transitioned, and I wasn't as aware of it as I am now.
So Pam, are we moving down a rabbit hole that we won't be able to get out of in our lifetime? Or do you see there will be some type of resolution in our lifetime?
Well, I think I'm the eternal optimist, and I believe that there'll be some revolutionary change, because I don't believe that these Gen Zers are going to tolerate this nonsense. They think these young people think this is absolutely crazy. And because if you notice from all the unrest that took place last summer, a lot of the people out there that were really protesting vigorously were Gen Z white kids, right? And to their credit, to those who weren't doing that undercover mission too, because we had some people doing the undercover thing as well, doing the shady stuff on the side. But to their credit, they're not going to tolerate this nonsense. They think this is utterly ridiculous. And if we can continue, and I might add that on the forefront of all of this type of work are Black women who are leading the charge in voting rights and what have you. And if we can corral these young people, I believe that we will overcome this, because it's in all of our best interests. The way I see what's happening in America is that we're destroying ourselves from within. All of that money we spend on nuclear weaponry and what have you, we need to be looking internally at what we're doing to each other with our guns and crazy gun laws and really lack of laws and all that. We're destroying ourselves. So I'm believing that we will have a revolution from within to do what is right, and that our young people will lead us through that. That's my hope.
And speaking of young people, Dr. McDonald, where are the students now at UNC, the Black students specifically, as far as their disappointment, or, we're getting ready to start a new school year. Will Black student enrollment be down? Will more students decide, you know what, I'd rather be at an HBCU than be at a PWI?
Yeah, so, one of my biggest questions and concerns for us within the journalism school is, how do we heal from all of this? I do expect there to be, we've seen like an exodus of faculty, and those people were already planning to leave before it came out what happened with Nikole Hannah-Jones. So I do expect there to be a decline in our faculty, and as well as in our students, in terms of just feeling that UNC is not a welcoming place for Black people. And it just really brought to light just a lot of other issues that have existed at the university for a very, very long time.
Brooks, let me ask you this question. I meant to ask you earlier when I wanted you to piggyback off of Peter, but we kind of got sidetracked. Do you at any point in time exercise your white male privilege? I mean, when you have to. Sometimes you might have to. Do you do it when you need to?
Sure. When my ankle is better and I go running in my neighborhood at night. And I'm not afraid.
Hmm?
You know, I see a police car, and I'm only afraid, we've had this, I've joked this before, I'm only afraid that they're going to have noticed that I was going too fast or saw that I jaywalked. And if they stop me, I'm only afraid that they're going to give me a ticket. I like to think that I don't deploy my white male privilege actively, but I'm sure that subconsciously, I mean, it gives me a confidence in situations that I might not otherwise have. But like we've talked about before, it's also balanced by the fact that I'm gay. And so when I came out to myself, that's when I understood, you know, in my 30, I was kind of late bloomer. I realized how much privilege I was losing. Because, you know, when I was a little boy, I mean, I've talked about this before, when I was a little boy in the 60s, every astronaut looked like me. Every president looked like me. When they said you could be anything you want, I knew they were talking to me, but I also knew that was a lie, because I knew that I could never be any of those things. Because as soon as they found out what I was in danger. Girl, you in danger. So, so I think I can recognize that my privilege is a double-edged sword, and so it makes me impressed by straight white men, straight white Christian men who get it. Because I'm not sure I would have gotten it at such a young age, especially if I weren't gay.
Interesting.
Speaking of lies, how much of history that we've been taught to this date, because I mean, like Crispus Attucks, Martin Luther King, and Rosa Parks.
Right.
But I will say this. In my high school, we did have Black history. It wasn't elective, but I took it and I learned so much. So in that respect, I really felt like I was privileged to learn more than some of my other, Black friends. But how much of the history do you believe that we've been taught to this point is actually true? Or is it really based on somebody's subjectivity, based on whatever? Peter, how much of the history that you've learned that you believe is true?
That's a very broad question and very difficult, but I'm just reflecting on how slavery and civil rights and the Civil War were taught in my junior high and high schools. And I don't think it got the right attention. I don't think that, it was in Ohio and in Nebraska and Omaha. And so we did get, at least some mention of the evils of slavery, but it wasn't something that was dwelled on. And I'm a kind of an amateur historian myself, and I try to bring a certain skepticism to anything in the historical record, and just sort of examine it to see if I think that's probably the way it was. But I don't think the textbooks that we used growing up were very illuminative, had any depth to them, and was very much taught from a white point of view, white historians writing these textbooks, white administrators approving those textbooks. So it was a distorted picture in some sense.
Pam, how much do you believe is true?
I was fortunate in that I had very woke parents. So a lot of things I learned within my own family and whatnot. I went to a Lutheran school from like 3rd to 8th grade, and they did the best they could, but it was not, like I say, it was very traditional and that whole thing. So we didn't go in depth in a whole lot of things, but for the most part, a lot of more historical things that I learned from home and through my family, my mom and dad. Though my parents were together, they were both. My parents actually met and married in the Nation of Islam in Detroit. So they have a very unique perspective, or they did. They're not in that anymore, but they had a very unique perspective on history and whatnot. So I had a different lens.
And if I can chime in, I had a very different experience. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. As you're probably aware, the neighborhoods are pretty segregated. I went to an all-Black elementary school where we were taught Black history from kindergarten on. We learned about Rosa Parks in kindergarten and beyond that. And then I was in second grade when Roots aired. And we went home with a note for our parents to watch Roots with us and discuss slavery. And then beyond that, elementary school is kindergarten through 8th grade in Chicago. Every Friday, like, we watched it again on film strip back in that day and had discussions about it. But, you know, I share that at the same time, there's still so much that I did not learn. You know, with regards to Indigenous Americans, we learned the Thanksgiving story and that sort of it. And I didn't know about other things like the Indian Removal Act of 1830 until I was actually beyond college. Other laws that we've had in this country that discriminated against different groups, I didn't learn until much later in life.
Brooks, you grew up in Texas, so I know you have a totally different perspective on what history was like there versus the rest of the country. So, can you share that with us?
And at the same time, my dad was in the Air Force. He was a fighter pilot. So we moved around a lot. So, but not as much as other people. But, you know, every 2 or 3 years, we'd be in something. So I went, you know, in Colorado and New York State and Virginia, Texas. So yeah, when I was in the second grade, I guess I was still in Texas, and so that was, you know, 1966, I guess, you know, and it was the war between the states. It wasn't the Civil War. And we knew it was about states' rights, but that was the extent of it. You know, I mean, it was the second grade. Little white kids in the second grade in Texas in 1966. You don't learn a lot about. But sanitize for your protection. Sanitize for the protection of white supremacy. But my question is always, how much of it is systematic and deliberate? And how much of it is my brother and I disagree about what happened in certain events in our family, and we were both there. And we both saw the same, you know, how many puppies were in that litter? You know, it's the kind of the Rashomon phenomenon. So a lot of it is definitely systematic and deliberate. But, you know, all history needs to be taken with a grain of salt. Because even the best, most objective historical account is a human being writing their recollection of an event. And we all know that memory is fallible. And as you think about something, you rewrite the memory, and so eventually you're remembering the memory of the memory of the memory of the memory instead of the actual event itself. And it drifts and it shifts. So it's all a cloud of perception. But there's also deliberate, systematic exclusion of information. You know, I live in the occupied Kingdom of Hawaii, and I did not know that I was moving to the occupied Kingdom of Hawaii when I moved here in 1980. But the overthrow was illegal, and the laws that gave George Bush Sr., that's not really his real name, the legal authority to kick Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait would give somebody with the power the legal right to kick the United States out of, you know, Hawaii. Nobody has that power.
I remember you saying this was in a previous discussion that we had that when we talked about Juneteenth, remember?
Mhm.
And how Juneteenth wasn't, even though it happened in Texas, and we all expect that Texas would be the grand parade of parades of states for Juneteenth, that you really didn't know much about it or didn't really tie it into anything that was really significant in Texas.
Because I remember my mom specifically saying it's for Black people. It's a thing, you know, that's it's an important holiday, but it's a Black holiday, and so it's not applicable to white people. It's like, oh, now I'm like, okay. But it was just kind of the psychological segregation of, you know, and she was not a segregationist. She was, you know, worked for equality and blah, blah, blah. But that wasn't for us. That wasn't about us.
Had you heard of Juneteenth, Peter?
Probably not until 20 or 30 years ago when it, you know, would surface in Arizona. They'd have an annual celebration in Phoenix for Juneteenth. And so it started to get some coverage in the news, and that's when I learned about it. I mean, you know, 20, like I said, 20 or 30 years ago.
Is
And,
is Juneteenth relevant?
Absolutely. It just astounds me that this happened, that these, you know, we had the emancipation and nobody told them. I mean, that's just astounding to me. It's just so cruel and so tragic to me.
Texans, there's a lot of Texans who still don't want to admit that the South lost. That's what the whole thing about the monuments is about, it maintaining their fantasies that the Confederacy won. And so if you take down, you know, it's not erasing history, it's erasing the fantasy that it was a just cause and that it will rise again. And you know, all that crap.
So let me ask all of you this question. So we all know the election is now past us, and we all know who won. But
Not in Arizona.
oh yeah, that's true. Not in Arizona, and some parts of Texas too, I understand. But then there are still 70 plus. I heard that too, Brooks. There are still 70 plus million people who are living in some other
Fantasy.
fantasy, some other time zone, some other something. Do you think it'll ever be possible? Because these are the same people that probably object to the 1619 Project. These are some of the same people who, you know, want to restrict voting rights. These are the same people who would like to go back to the 50s of the Beaver era.
They would go back to the 1850s.
Okay, the 1850s. Will we ever be able to convince maybe even half of those 70 plus million people that the world is different and it's time to move on? What do we need to do to do that?
It's just such a desperation of them trying to hold on to power. And I'm hopeful. Pam mentioned that she's hopeful that there can be change. One of the things going in our favor, I think, is that population that you're talking about, 72 million who voted for Trump, they're at the upper end. Many of them are older people and they're fading away. And, you know, they spend their days watching Fox News and listening to these conspiracy theories and crazy stuff that they spew on there. And they're also not getting vaccinated. So, you know, there's hope in the younger generation. What's that?
That's the demographics that I was talking about.
Right. Yeah. So
that's why they're so terrified, because they know that we just have to wait 20 years. We cannot change their minds. We cannot touch the bullshit that they believe, because they cultivate it. They cherish it. The warm glow of it keeps the frost away. They're white supremacy. And white supremacy as a tool of white evangelical Christianity, and white evangelical Christianity as a tool of white supremacy. Those are tied together inextricably. And they cannot let go of one without the other, because God itself has ordained that the white man rule over America. They cannot let that go, because if they let that go, they have to admit that what they believe about God and their place in the universe is wrong. Just like they can't let go about climate change. They can't let go about evolution. And that's what the whole thing with masks is a problem. Because if they admit that scientists are right about masks, then what else are they going to have to admit that scientists are right about? And if they start doing that, their entire worldview collapses. And all they have is their white skin.
And their hate and their hatred
for white skin. And their belief in a small, cruel God. They don't believe in the big, beautiful Jesus. They believe in small, cruel Yahweh Elohim, who obliterates his enemies. That's their God. Old Testament God. They put a veneer of white, blonde-haired, curly, blue-eyed, curly-haired Jesus on it. But that's not the God they worship.
Wow. Okay. I
So
almost
that's
want
my
to end
answer
it
to that
there.
question.
Beverly, your question actually makes me think of a conversation I had in my class once. We were talking about how will our society adapt, or how will we adapt to a society where there is no majority group. One of my students said, all of the people born in the 60s and before are going to have to die off first. So that just piggybacks onto what both Brooke said, as well as Pam said, about just feeling really hopeful for Gen Zers, because they are absolutely not having it.
They're not.
They will call you on your mess in a heartbeat.
Hmm.
Wow.
They are.
So
Their-
as we go ahead,
Their
Peter.
religion, their sexuality, their concept of color and race, all of that is completely different from what I grew up with. And it's glorious. And I can't wait. I'm only afraid that I'm not going to live that long.
So we
I-
started this, program talking about Nicole Hannah-Jones and the fact that, UNC lost her, Howard gained her. My question here now is, can students really be taught objective journalism when there's no diversity on the staff? And I'm not saying that, white journalists, white professors can't teach objectivity, but can they really learn different points of view if there is no diversity? And Peter, I know that you have worked in media, so I am going to start this question with you. What are your thoughts? Did you ever have a Black professor in college?
Well, oddly enough, I never took any journalism. So I have an English degree and I learned on the job, and I learned from other journalists. And like I said early on, it wasn't very diverse. And as it became more diverse, my horizons broadened. I learned so much and from other journalists. And so obviously having diversity among the journalism teaching faculty is vital. Thinking to my college at Northern Arizona University, and I'm pretty sure that there wasn't diversity then, and there may be a little more diverse now. Let's hope so. Although that has been an issue in the broad faculty at Northern Arizona University, and they've just hired a Hispanic president, and I think that's one of his missions, is to make the more diverse faculty. So, yes, it's just vital to have diversity in the teaching profession.
And, I just want to interject something here before I move on. It's interesting. You said you have an English degree, and I'm not singling you out here, but I think that this just proves a point. I actually have a degree in journalism. If I had left Ohio University with a degree in English, I don't think, now I might be wrong. I mean, I just feel I'm so talented, so I probably could have gotten any job, but I don't know if I would have been taken as seriously as a journalist with an English degree. And I think that that just goes to show the difference in how people are perceived. You could walk in with an English degree and you could get a job. I, on the other hand, don't feel that I could have. Maybe I could have, I just don't know. But I know that I had to work really hard to get that journalism degree so that I could go out into the world and say, hey, I have a degree in journalism. I am qualified.
Right.
So
I wish I had. And honestly, I started off at the bottom rung at some, giveaway weekly newspapers and freelanced while I was still in college to kind of get that first step. And, but I do wish I'd had the training and, but yes, my white male privilege perhaps helped me get my foot in the door.
okay, and thank you. I just wanted to share that because I do think that that is one of the differences. All right, so Pam, let me ask you the question. Can students really learn any subject objectively if there's no diversity on the staff?
Honestly, I went to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and I'm gonna tell you, I ended up having a double major, one in mass comm and one in Afro and African American studies, because that's where I could get teachers who look like me, really. And so I will say that within the school of the training in mass communications at Michigan, I can't even, to be honest, I can't and I'm old, so I don't remember any Black professors there. I cannot recall not one. I only remember those that were on the we call it Afro-American and African studies
Right.
back then. But I think I'm not saying that other ethnicities, white folks and Latinos or whatever, they can't teach that diversity or whatever of all races and whatnot, but you need to have someone that looks like you. And I think to make that impact and that difference, that's my feelings on it.
Brooks, your thoughts? You're at the University of Hawaii, right?
I am.
Okay.
Where the student body is predominantly people of color and the faculty is still disproportionately white. Because they're brought in from other universities around the country. That's getting a lot better. And so the younger faculty are more likely to be women, more likely to be people of color, more likely to be local. A lot of universities don't like to, it's kind of inbreeding, you don't hire your own undergraduates back again. So that's a dynamic. But I kind of want to say that the flip side of it too is, no, there cannot be objectivity if everybody looks the same. But it's also important for little white kids to see people of color in positions of authority.
Absolutely.
And expertise. And so that's part of this whole tragedy. It's not only a tragedy for the white kid, but for the Black kids who aren't getting a person who looks like them, but it's a tragedy for white kids who aren't seeing a person of authority and expertise. The top of her field is a Black woman. And so they don't, that undercuts their experience. I had a Black science teacher when I was in 7th grade, 8th grade, I don't exactly remember, before now, in the morning of the world. And that had a big impact on me.
Mm-hmm.
This, young Black man who was teaching me science.
Mm-hmm.
I loved science. And so that was important.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, the continued segregation, de facto segregation, anyway, I don't know where I'm going with that, but it's tragic. The whole situation is just kind of tragic.
All right, and I'm going to give you, Dr. McDonald, the last thoughts on this one.
Yeah. So I went to college at the University of Wisconsin at Oshkosh. I was a radio, TV, film major, and we only had one woman faculty member. The rest were white men. All of the faculty in the department were white. I did take like several religion classes because Dr. Bean was one of the few Black faculty. To answer your question, I think we definitely need a diverse faculty to teach those diverse perspectives, to have objectivity. And just to share some of the things that we're doing at UNC Chapel Hill, we were actually developing a curriculum DEI toolkit so that our faculty who are teaching news writing will have access to the NABJ style guide, the NAHJ style guide. And we also, I'm really excited about this, we are starting a foundational course in cultural competence, because that is going to be necessary for our next generation of both journalists and strategic communicators.
That's
Awesome.
exciting. That sounds great, Trevi.
Yes, and I'm sure that if you're spearheading it or involved in the project, that it is definitely going to be great. Well, I will say that I was fortunate enough to have an African-American, he was my film teacher back when it was the actual strips of film. He was my film teacher, and that was my freshman year, sophomore year, I believe. Eric Moore, who lives in the area now, and he pulled my coattail and just basically told me, you're a talented young lady, but you know what? You can't ride on just that you're Black in affirmative action. You got to get out there and you got to, just do what you do, show how talented you are. So it was refreshing to have someone like that to tell you, because, white professors just can't tell you what the Black experience is like in the world. They just can't tell you. So no one could tell me, that I would face racism or sexism or anything like that, but he could tell me and I would receive it. And I think, to what Brooks is saying, that is the beauty of being able to have someone who is diverse, because if you do, then you do get all perspectives. Agreed?
Absolutely.
All right. Any closing thoughts, anyone?
Yeah, I'd like to just ask a question for Dr. McDonald about the situation there in North Carolina. One, if it's going to diminish interest in the journalism program among minority students, and then also if she fears any backlash for her positions and talking about what has happened there. I know you're tenured, but do you feel like you might be exposed yourself to any backlash?
So to answer your second question, my dean has just really been supportive of us, just sharing our stories and actually talking to the press. I've been covered by the Washington Post several times, as well as some local media. I'm comfortable because everything that I am saying is factual, it's documented. As a journalism professor, I definitely always want to make sure that I am sharing facts. At the same time, I have gotten some really nasty emails, as have some of my other colleagues who signed some of the statements in support of Nikole Hannah-Jones. So that's, that is definitely one concern. I'm also concerned about recruiting faculty and students. We've had, and not just in the journalism school, some Black graduate students who are coming to UNC on full rides, who have been criticized in social media circles for coming to UNC with everything going on. And these are students who have, a full ride for their master's or their doctoral degree. And some of them are first generation college students. And this, for some of them may be the only opportunity. So we're looking, for ways to address that. And one of the things that I do want is to make sure that everybody in our school, students, staff, and faculty, feel welcome and feel really working hard to foster a sense of belonging. You know, there are issues in the school, but I think the bigger issues are on the campus and then with the structure in the state as well.
Mm.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I was going to say, Beverly, that just like Brooke said, the diversity goes both ways. It's so important that we have opportunities with people who don't look like us, because we learn from them too. It shouldn't be, it doesn't go just one way. It's just as important for me. Interestingly enough, all of my mentors that I've had throughout my career have been Caucasian, everyone, 2 men and 1 white female. It just happened that way. So I learned a lot from them. Unfortunately, I got all the rough and tumble stuff I had to learn on my own. And but you gain from any relationships that you can have from people who aren't like you, so that we are all enriched by different perspectives. Always, 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 always.
I totally agree with that. Brooks, any closing thoughts?
I feel like I've said enough. And so thank you for the opportunity.
All
I don't
right,
have
very
any
good.
closing statements.
All right, well, guys, listen, thank you so much for this discussion today. I sincerely appreciate it. So on behalf of Dr. McDonald, Peter Corbett, Brooks Bays, and Pam Purifoy, this is Beverly Mahone, thanking you for tuning in. And remember to stay empowered along your journey. See ya.
Beverly.
Oh, no.
Good news you can use for your life. If you want